episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show with another fascinating guest involved in creating a better tomorrow for all of us. Today we are joined by Shane Bigelow, who is the Chief Executive Officer of a company called Ownum, which is a Cleveland-based company that helps government become more efficient by converting paper-based processes to digital formats using blockchain technology. Prior to Ownum, Mr. Bigelow was the Senior Vice President and Managing Director at Bernstein Company, which was one of Wall Street's premier sell-side research and brokerage firms, where he managed a part of that firm's U.S. business. He sat on their Responsible Investment Committee, which focused on the United Nations Principle for Responsible Investment, environmental, social, and government issues, and socially responsible investment matters. And there he developed a highly informed view about how the blockchain technologies can ultimately help society by reducing cost of government, and ultimately that helps inform the business and the strategy at Ownum today. Under the Ownum umbrella, Mr. Bigelow started a company called Vital Chain, which is focused on making medical record data more user-friendly by enabling fast, secure, and digitally verified paths to acquire and use it, enabling economic progress, expense savings throughout the healthcare ecosystem, patients, hospitals, medical data users, and ultimately they want to help end the reliance on paper-based systems that have been around for 100 years to help manage our vital records and so forth. Prior to Bernstein, Mr. Bigelow was the global financial products manager for Cisco Systems Capital. He graduated with a finance degree and a concentration in international business from the University of Notre Dame. He holds a master's in international political economy and development from Fordham University. And when he's not involved in these blockchain technologies, he's also a member of the board for the Blue Coats, the Northeast Ohio Foundation for Patriotism, the Jesuit School Endowment Fund, where he's president, and the Lincoln Hall Foundation, where he's chairman of the investment committee. He's additionally been involved with the United Way of Greater Cleveland area as member of their campaign committee, an alumnus Leadership Cleveland, a member of the Greater Cleveland Partnership Commission for Economic Inclusion, and an alumnus of the FBI Citizens Academy. Shane Bigelow, thanks for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thanks. I've got to clearly shorten that bio, so my apologies.
It's a great bio. It's a great bio. Shane, typically we start things off by giving our guests the floor just for a little bit to talk about themselves. If you can sort of take us back to the beginning, a little bit about who you are, where you grew up, how you got interested in sort of the world of finance and economic development, and sort of a little bit of your career path to date. I think that'd be a great way to get going.
Yeah, well, thanks for indulging that. So I grew up outside of Philadelphia, sort of always displaced New Yorkers. My mother's side of my family was all from New York, and I wound up going to school in the Midwest, as you mentioned, and then right after school I started my first software company out in California. It was a software company to help banks more efficiently process their loan and lease portfolios around car loans. I sold that company and went to another software company, which we sold to Cisco, which is how I wound up at Cisco that you mentioned. And then from Cisco, I got recruited away from one of their investment arms called Cisco Capital to this boutique firm on Wall Street called Bernstein. Along the way, both software and finance were sort of in my blood, and after I sort of finished my tour of duty at the Wall Street firm, I really wanted to get back into building another software company. And my business partner is a guy named Bernie Moreno. He's a successful entrepreneur in the automotive retail space, and he and I were good friends and always banding about different ways that we could come together to start new companies and take advantage of some of the things that we saw that could be fixed, particularly in government. We didn't look at it like we could fix government. We're not, hopefully we're not that naive. What our view was that if we could build technologies that made government services easier for consumers, whether those consumers were people or companies, there would be money to be made. And that was a problem that we both dealt with in our businesses, whether it was his automotive retail or me on Wall Street or in software. Dealing with the government isn't always easy. And sometimes it's somewhat nonsensical, the way you have to communicate with the government. You mentioned Vital Chain, and that was really started the idea of why am I taking my child's birth certificate and giving it to the Little League commissioner every spring to validate that my child's age? Like, I'm giving that person all sorts of information, and it's like a nonprofit dad's league, baseball league. Why do they have a copy of my kid's birth certificate? What they really need is a QR code on my phone that they scan, and it validates off the state system and says, yeah, he's 12. Put him in the 12 and under league. And it's the same when you go to a bar or, a restaurant. Why do my sisters have to validate their ID to some scary bouncer at a bar who, now knows they're not at home, knows their home address, and, knows when they left the place. And that's not great either, right? And my business partner, Bernie, he was worried about that for his daughters. So it was the sort of thing where it made us realize that there's an opportunity to bring better solutions. You mentioned Vital Chain. We have another company, Champ Titles, that's focused in the automotive titling space. Could we bring these solutions? Could we bring software into that world to bring solutions that ultimately provide efficiency? And that's why we created Ownum, the holding company that creates these companies.
Excellent. When I go out on the internet nowadays and I type in blockchain, the first thing typically pops up is this, your Wikipedia definition, which I have here, a growing list of records called blocks that are linked using cryptography, where each block contains a cryptographic hash of the previous block, a timestamp, and transaction data, generally represented as a Merkle tree. Now, if you were to offer me $1 million today to explain blockchain to somebody, I can't do it. I know a lot about other things, but could you please, just for a couple minutes, I apologize for this ahead of time, take us through the basic understanding of what blockchain means, and if you could also sort of segregate it or sort of make the connections, because in, I think, most people's minds, even though they can't explain blockchain, they know it's somehow connected to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Also, take us on a little bit of the blockchain, crypto, Bitcoin journey, what it is, what it's not.
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, what blockchain is it's just a really sophisticated ledger. It keeps track of who owns what, like whatever you want to fill in the blank of what is, you can fill it in with. It just keeps track of stuff. And so it's a ledger that is highly auditable. So that's really good for things like cryptocurrency, because you want to track where currencies move and you want to know that you got the right amount for doing the right thing. And that's what's called a smart contract. When something happens and you get money in exchange for it, it's because the contract kicked it off, and there's an auditable track record on blockchain on this ledger. And it's immutable, right? So once you put an entry into it, you can amend the entry. You can say, oh, I entered the wrong entry, but you can't change what you put in. Mm-hmm. And that's great for, tracking the provenance of assets. So for us, when we were building the company, people said, oh, you're building a blockchain company. And we're like, no, we're building a software company that uses blockchain. And they're like, oh, why do you use blockchain? And I said, well, we had this problem. We needed to have an immutable place where we could have, we could make a ledger highly auditable and track the provenance of assets, whether the asset was cars and car titles or birth certificates or medical information. We needed to be able to track that, and the consumer needed to be able to own it. They need, you should own your medical data, right? It shouldn't be owned by some hospital system or your doctor's office or, the electronic medical record company. It should be owned by you. And you should be able to determine when it's being used and for what. And that's one of the big advantages of this ledger called blockchain, is you can see when anyone's interacting with your stuff. And so if you want to have pure control over your information, blockchain is one of the easiest ways to maintain that and accomplish that. The example I often give to try to explain the way blockchain works is, imagine you owned a pizza shop, and at your pizza shop, you had a set of books, and every day you log in, here's how much I sold, and here's how much it costs to sell those things, and here's how much I made. And then you go home, and at the set of books you have at home, you enter those same transactions. So that's why people always keep two sets of books, because if the house burns down or the pizza shop burns down, there's someplace else you can go for your books. Well, with blockchain, anytime a change is made to the record, both sides have to agree, but it's not two, it can be thousands of entities that have to agree. And that's why the cryptography is so good, because you could trick two entities, but you can't really trick thousands of entities to all of a sudden all agree on the same thing at the same time. At least that's the principle, is that you can't do that. And so the cryptography is just the function of having so many players in the system so that you know that every transaction that's occurring is the right transaction, that it's correct, that it's been proven that this is the right transaction. And so with cryptocurrency, that's why having it on a very big blockchain like the Bitcoin blockchain is so important, because you've got this massive amount of computers that are all running these equations to say, yes, this is a real transaction. Money should really move, value should really move. And it's a system of trust, because you've got this cryptographically secure method through which you're validating the transaction. And so that's why you want cryptocurrency on the biggest blockchain you can, because you want as many players validating that, yes, this is a correct transaction. In our case, for private enterprise use, where we don't use crypto, what we do is we use the ledger functions of blockchain to store all this data and allow for an immutable record and perfect provenance of an asset, like a car or like your medical information or what have you. And so there's two ways to think about blockchain. There's permissionless, which is what Bitcoin is. You can get as many anybody can join it. Anybody can join the Bitcoin blockchain, and that's what makes it great, because the more players that are on it, the more cryptographically secure it becomes. And then you've got permissioned blockchain, which is like, hey, I only want certain players to get access to this. I only want insurance companies to have access to this. I only want car companies to have access to this. I only want hospital, whatever that is, that's permissioned. And you can have a little more control over your blockchain, but get all the benefits of blockchain. So there's kind of two worlds of blockchain: permissioned and permissionless. The really I said Bitcoin or blockchain purists would say that permission blockchain is not blockchain, but we don't have to get into that. They do the same thing. And so that's probably the easiest way I can explain it. And it takes a few minutes, so my apologies.
No, it was spot on. And I really appreciate that insight, because it now it lays the ground for everything else we're going to be talking about. So great. So, as I said in the intro, so ultimately VitalChain's goal is to end this legacy paper system that we've had in healthcare for forever. The real short-term opportunity nowadays, obviously, that you've gotten involved in is this used for the COVID-19 testing, extremely important nowadays with every business shut down. How do we open these businesses again and keep them secure and know that these tests, whether Shane Bigelow, Ira Pastor, I get my test 1 week from LabCorp, I'm negative. Next week, Quest, I unfortunately test positive, whatever. You have to have a system in place that we know that this is updated, reliable, quick, and so forth. Take us a little through VitalChain as it pertains to COVID testing.
Yeah. So our view is that you've got to be able to make your medical record more useful. Mm-hmm. And right now, because it's largely in paper form or held in databases that you, the consumer, don't have access to, that makes it hard to use your data, so your medical data isn't user friendly. Well, one thing that we're realizing we need more of now is access to our COVID test records, and now access to the proof of vaccination. Yep. And so when we see the use cases rolling out, across the world, you've got many countries who are right now saying, hey, even the United States did it with international flights. You've got to prove that you have the vaccine or had a test that says you don't have COVID. Well, how are you doing that? Right. Well, right now people are doing it on paper. Well, okay. I mean, I've had the same yellow fever card with my passport for years. And, frankly, you could write whatever you want on that. And I'm not presuming that the person who's reading it is medically trained and can even read the doctor's handwriting to know which tests I had or which tests I didn't have. Well, a printout about COVID, if you've ever seen the lab results, if you compare what the lab results look like from LabCorp, Quest, Epic, Cerner, or Allscripts, they look completely different.
Mhm.
So we're expecting a flight attendant to be able to interpret this at the gate and control for, like, what does that do for my health? Further, do I really need them to have a copy of some portion of my medical record with my birth date and my weight on it and like stuff I don't need them flight attendant to see? The answer should be put it on the phone, have a QR code, have the QR code bounce off the record and come back and say, yes, you are clear to fly, or no, you're not clear to fly, or yes, you've had the vaccine and you can come into this outdoor concert venue and enjoy this great concert with 10,000 of your friends who are also vaccinated. Or yes, you can come back to your job because your employer said, hey, I want proof that you were vaccinated, which the new employment laws passed a couple of weeks ago actually permit employers to do. And we can debate the political correctness of that. But the reality is, if they have the right, they too are going to say, you have to prove that you had it. So how do you do that? And how do you do it without sharing too much of your information so that the person on the other side or the company on the other side doesn't all of a sudden have all of your personal information and now they're liable for having your PII? I have season tickets to a couple of sports teams, and I want to go to those games. But I also don't want the Cleveland Cavaliers to have a copy of some portion of my medical record, and now they're responsible for maintaining it and not losing it and not finding that some intern stole it and says, oh, Shane's a little overweight, which is true, but nonetheless. And so, that's what Vital Chain is out to solve, is how do you get into your medical record, pull out pertinent information, in this case, vaccination results or test results, display it to someone and know that you controlled it, you gave that person permission, they only got the information they needed, and it's yours. It's not anybody else's, and they don't have to worry about storing it, and you don't have to worry about getting used the wrong way.
Sure. Moving a little bit beyond now the code, you mentioned the testing, obviously the vaccination. I read recently that you started now doing some deals with, I guess, local HMOs or other healthcare providers. Obviously with nothing confidential, but can you talk a little bit about, beyond COVID, what are some of these healthcare organizations looking at Vital Chain in terms of some of the internal problems they're looking to solve after COVID?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, one of the things we love to be able to do is give back. A big part of our mission at any of the companies we've created has always been, how do we help the communities we're active in. One thing we spotted with hospitals during COVID was that the job that they still had to do around what we refer to as non-core tasks still existed. So let me give you an example.
Please.
If you can't afford to keep your power on because you can't afford to pay your power bill, but you have a piece of equipment from the hospital, like a respirator or something that requires power, generally every state has a program that says, if the hospital says that, or your doctor says that you need this, the power company has to keep your power on, right? That's just sort of, standard of caring for your neighbor. And so the problem is that people in that circumstance have to go to the hospital and get the hospital to sign a form from their power company and then FedEx it back or fax it back most of the time, unfortunately, fax it back to the power company, who then has to process it. Well, the probability of that system breaking down with so many points of human contact and paper is really high. So a lot of people, unfortunately, that need power go without power because it's hard to get into this process. And so what we can do, because we can reach into someone's medical record and pull a piece of data out with their permission, is we can go in and say, hey, we don't need, John Smith to go down to the hospital or fax the hospital a form from the power company and fax it back. We can just have John Smith go into our portal and he can say, okay, I need to grab this piece of my medical record. Okay, go in, grab the piece of the medical record that says John Smith needs a ventilator. And then John Smith, signs the note electronically, and that can go off to the power company, who can get it immediately. And no one at the hospital had to run interference on that. There's heroic stories from a great local hospital here called Metro Health that that our chairman is actually on the board of, and it's a fantastic hospital run by a guy named Dr. Akram Boutros. And they have these stories and they serve a lot of the underserved community in Cleveland of people who were in this circumstance, and they have a team of 14 people, and some of them are literally driving to people's homes to get signatures on these things so that they can get the power they need. And the heroic efforts they're putting in, but you know what they're not doing is they're not able to care for all the patients that are at the hospital when they're doing these sorts of things, and it's paperwork. And we can eliminate all of that. So a lot of the direction that we're taking the company is to say, how can we be useful? Yes, COVID will help with, but eventually that will pass, God willing. But how can we help hospitals eliminate this forms filling out that they have teams of people doing and not being committed to mission critical tasks while doing so? How can we replace that with automated tools that allow for those people to be tasked on something far more important like patient care, and we can automate these procedures around things like the power company or FMLA requests or disability placard requests or validating your birth certificate, things that happen all the time that actually interact with your medical record, but you may not think about it because, you know, every year I have to validate that my children had a physical before they go to school. Why is somebody dealing with that paperwork? Why can't I just get permission, get into their medical record, bounce back a note, and now the entity on the other side gets exactly what the airline got? Yes, they had their physical, or no, they didn't, right? They don't get anything else because they don't need anything else.
Very interesting. Shane, you have the Vital Chain also in the Ownum portfolio. As you mentioned, was this Champ Titles company where you're looking to optimize the title management process. Ownum is sort of a portfolio company of this Medici Ventures, part of Overstock, which is, I think you were quoted actually in an article. You're talking sort of, they're creating sort of this Keiretsu model with many companies, similar process, but there's sort of an ecosystem that can build on itself. Can you talk a little bit more about other things beyond the health records and the car records that you're thinking about? Once again, nothing confidential, but obviously this goes in so many directions.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so my investors know that we're not crowding or moving things in the wrong place, Medici invested in Vital Chain.
Okay.
And my business partner and I, we own Ownum, and so do a handful of employees along with us. But Champ is its own separate company. Vital Chain is its own separate company. Medici in Vital Chain. But you know, the direction that this goes, I think all leans back to some form of identity, right? So right now, we are confirming our identity with, you know, driver's licenses or passports, or passwords and multi-factor authentication when we log into a website. There's some really innovative things you can do. However, when you start thinking about, well, all of the unique data points of my life, parts of my medical record, maybe parts of my, parts of the transactions I consume online, they all make up a unique fingerprint of who I am digitally. And if I can pull some of that together, maybe with other players in the space that are similarly grabbing that data, I don't have to worry anymore about someone stealing my identity, because every time I need to log into something or prove that I am who I am, no one else would be able to prove it, because there wouldn't be a digital track record that would indicate that that person is exactly the same as me. So, for example, you take the stuff coming out of your medical record, you know, your birth certificate, your COVID, your COVID vaccination proof, a handful of other things that you might think about in your medical record, physical results, whatever. It very quickly uniquely identifies you, much like a fingerprint does, right? It very quickly uniquely identifies you. And if you can take that and digitally store that information and then allow people to use that as the proof of they are who they say they are, it gets really impossible for someone else to mimic that. So if all of that data is getting quickly matched up whenever I want to log into something or prove that I am who I am, no one else can really replicate that. And by the way, if it's on blockchain, it's all tracked. So if someone does like try to mimic it, you're going to know who did it, and you're going to know from where they did it and when they did it and how they did it. And you'll be able to unwind it because you can add a block to the blockchain that says, hey, all of these things were fraud. And you can't do that today. If someone steals your credit and gets and takes out 5 credit cards in your name because they had a copy of your ID or a copy of something, it's forever on there. There's no unwinding it. And so, this is what blockchain allows, is it's an immutable record, but you can add a block and explain what happened in the past and validate digitally that this is all accurate. So I think a lot of what we're able to do long-term is to help people control their identity, and control their information and own their information. One of the things I'm really excited about is, I use the big companies all the time. I use Amazon, I use Netflix, I use Google. I don't necessarily think they're evil. I know there's a part of the world that probably does. I just think they're big companies, and I'm trying to build big companies. Yep. But what I do think that is could be fixed is that I'm giving those companies a lot of information about me every time I use them, and they're monetizing it, but I don't get a cut for that. I don't get a discount on my purchases on Amazon. I don't get cheaper stuff when I search Google. I don't get better searches than anybody else. But if I own my data and I'm allowing someone else to use it, why can't I get a rev share on that? Why can't I own part of the revenue that they're receiving as a function of using my data? And I should be able to get that. I should be able to generate a payment for me sharing information about myself. And so that's what excites me about what we're doing. And that's what excites me about blockchain, is that you could control your information. It's yours. People should own their data, and anyone that's monetizing your data should have to share it with you. This is a path towards being able to do that. And that's exciting, because for people that don't have other sources of income, that could be a source of income. For people that are very private, they could say, I'm shutting a lot of this off because I don't want to share it and I don't care about making some money off of it. But that's the way that we can really expand identity, and that's the way we can put money fairly in the pockets of people whose identity is being used for commercial purposes. And those big companies will still make lots of money off of that, but so should the person who's sacrificing information about themselves.
While I have you, I have to ask. I mean, you spent many years at sort of one of the extremely large, sort of old school Wall Street firms. Can I have a couple of minutes with you just on sort of the state of what this Bitcoin cryptocurrency stuff was in 2021? Your opinion on where that is all going?
Yeah, sure. I don't profess to be an expert, but I did stay in a Holiday Inn last night, so I'll give it a run. First of all, don't take any of this as investment advice. It's just my point of view. But the way that I look at it is that we've got cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin that have a limited supply. Right? There's only so many Bitcoin that'll ever be created. Yeah. And if you've got more uses for it popping up every day, right? You can use it on PayPal now. So that means you can use it to pay for anything on PayPal, which is pretty much the whole world. You can use it to buy cars. I mean, I know my business partner has bought and sold cars at his dealership with Bitcoin. So the more use cases that grow and change, then the more demand there is for something that has limited supply. So it's not surprising when something with limited supply that has increasing demand watches the price go up. The question is, how high can it go? Right. So the real equation you have to run if you're looking at investing in any of these things or thinking about where they might go is, how much demand do I think will be there for the use of Bitcoin? Many people would argue that Bitcoin, because it takes so much computing power to generate Bitcoin and to mine Bitcoin is the term, that it has a lot of uses now because it's the dominant one, but maybe it turns into MySpace, right? Because MySpace was great, but until Facebook came along and just made the whole thing a lot easier. And so the question is, if you believe that, then what is easier to use than Bitcoin? And a lot of people would point to Ethereum, or they would point to Cardano or other cryptos that are popping up that have merits where they use less power, which is appealing to those of us that worry about the world and worry about power consumption. And so maybe there's people that shift from one blockchain to another because they say, I want all the benefits of blockchain. I want all these other things that Shane's talking about, but I don't want to ruin the world while I'm doing it. And others might say, well, really, I want to use something that I can use as simply as my credit card. And that requires faster transactions. So maybe that's something that's not Bitcoin. But the reality is that because it's so easy to be able to move value. So for example, I moved my crypto from one place that stored my crypto to a whole nother one. So this would be like moving investments from one firm to another, or moving your bank account from one bank, moving it from Bank of America to Chase. The reason why people don't move is it's a pain. You got to sign a bunch of forms, you got to do it. I literally moved all of the money in 10 minutes. And it wasn't that I didn't pass any KYC rules. I filled out all the KYC forms. These companies do a great job of collecting the information on who I am. It didn't allow me to do anything untoward, but it tracked it all. It has a perfect record and database. They can report it to all the regulators that want to look at it. I get tax forms for everything I did, but it took 10 minutes, right? And no human involvement. And it was easy. And I had a proof. I had a track record, a perfect track record of that money moving. I could watch the entire thing happen right in front of me. I can't do that if I move my money between two banks right now. And I should, and that's not fair. I wired money the other day to settle a transaction we were doing, and it sat for 3 days.
Yeah.
And that was, I paid the wire fee to go the same day, but because of a holiday and it was the end of the day and somebody didn't want to hit the button, it sat for 3 days. Well, guess who didn't get the interest on those 3 days? Me. That shouldn't happen, right? And that's why I think so many people are looking at crypto and saying, it's just a better way to move and hold money. It's not a different kind of money. It's not a tulip craze and a bubble and all this stuff that fear mongers want. This is backed by dollars. There is money that's sitting out there for many of these cryptos. So, if it's a legitimate cryptocurrency that's backed by the legitimate blockchain that has legitimate money being put into it, it has value. And if the supply is limited and demand is growing, the price will go up. The question is, how high?
Appreciate that. Yeah, it's a fascinating new time, and a lot for all of us to learn about. But it's really fascinating stuff you're working on, Shane, and I'm wishing you the best with it. All these companies. For everybody that's going to be watching this episode or listening to the podcast, you've been listening to Shane Bigelow, Chief Executive Officer of Ownum and Vital Chain, which is focused on making medical record data more user-friendly, enabling fast, secure, and digitally verifiable paths to acquire and use it, ultimately making this whole ecosystem of patients, hospitals, and medical data users more efficient, saving money, and allowing for economic progress along the way. Shane, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us and teach us about these topics. And, thank you for what you're doing. And as we say, thank you for helping to create this better, more innovative tomorrow for all of us. It's been really insightful time.
Well, thanks for having me. And, I could say is advice is only worth what you paid for it. And listening to me was free. So don't overvalue it. But please reach out to me on social media, anything you'd like. I'm easy to find. I'd love to get to know more people in the community and answer any questions or get beaten up for something you didn't agree with me today. So happy to talk to you.
Absolutely. Well, and we'll put links to everything in the bio so they can find you.
All right.
Take care, Shane.
Thank you very much, Ira.